Chapter 1. Even though Bo Tennant was on busy Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles, he'd never felt so alone. As he waited for help, he watched the faces of people passing. They stared straight ahead or craned their necks to the opposite side of the street to avert their eyes. That's when he saw her, waist-length brown hair, bouncing as she walked. She held a phone to her ear. A big handbag dragged on her wrist, and her other hand clutched a box. Her brown eyes caught his, and when she didn't turn away, he felt a thrill, as if he'd touched an electricity pole. She stopped beside him. "I have to go," she said. Bo looked up at her, but her eyes were on the box in her hand. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up and dropped the phone in her bag. "You're stuck," she said, looking at the wheelchair caught in a crack of concrete on the sidewalk. "Yes, ma'am," Bo drawled in his southern accent. "Here, hold this." She placed the box onto his lap and squatted, somehow making the act look elegant in her silver platforms and black capri pants. She murmured. "I need some grunt to get that wheel out." "Don't worry," he started, but she'd walked off, leaving him with the box. What did she think he was? Her shelf? She stood in the path of the oncoming crowd. He saw her zero in on a young man in a tight white T-shirt that displayed his bulging pecs. Bo knew the moment that white T-shirt caught her eye. White T-shirt smiled flirtatiously and slowed. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself," she smiled back. "So, I need a hand with something? You got a few minutes?" "Sure," the young man replied. She led him over to Bo. "I need you to lift the wheel while I push," she said firmly. White T-shirt was taken aback, but her tone obviously brooked no argument. "There's no need," Bo tried to interject again, but she paid him no mind as she went to stand behind the chair. "On my count," she told the young man. 1, 2, 3. She pushed while he lifted the wheel. "Thanks. Appreciate you being a good Samaritan." She patted White T-shirt on the shoulder and turned to Bo. "Are you good?" White T-shirt looked at her for a moment, but apparently realizing he was dismissed, he merged back with the crowd, a confused look on his face. "Yes, ma'am," Bo said, feeling as confused as the young man who'd helped him. When the woman first stopped, he'd pegged her for a looky-loo, one of those people who thought they could get his life story as part and parcel of small talk. Yet now that she'd gone and blown his first impression out of the water, he didn't quite know what to make of her. "What happened here?" She looked at his hand with concern. He'd cut it on the wheel spoke when he'd tried to wrench the wheelchair out of the crack. Before he could say anything again, she had taken hold of his hand and was looking closely at the cut. "It's fine." He pulled his hand back, feeling self-conscious under the force of her attention. "You can't turn the wheels with a cut in your hand. You'll get an infection." She went behind the chair, and before he knew what she was doing, she was pushing him toward Luna's cafe. That had been his destination, to meet his friend Carter, but Bo didn't know whether to feel thankful or annoyed that she was hijacking him and his chair without asking. She chose a table under a green shade umbrella. After she moved a metal chair out of the way and took the box off his lap, she pushed him in. As she sat across from him, their knees almost touched under the small table. She placed the box under her chair and took hold of his palm again. "It just needs a good clean." She rifled through her bag. A waiter appeared. "Chai latte with skim milk." She rattled off her order without looking up. "And you, sir?" The waiter looked at him. Black coffee, no sugar, he said. The woman pulled out an antiseptic tube and a box of bandages from her bag. As he watched the gentle way she tended to his wound, he was puzzled. She was a stranger who jumped in to help him when everyone else acted like he was a leper. He nodded at her supplies. "You come prepared." "I'm a costume designer," she said. "In my line of work, I find there's always some minor injury or another that needs to be tended to." He should have guessed. Prime Studio was only 20 minutes away, and a lot of his employees frequented Luna's for breakfast meetings. It was also a cafe known for celebrity watching and was stalked by tabloid reporters, which is why Carter insisted they meet here. "So you're in the business," he said, stressing the word. Los Angeles was the city of entertainment. Most people were employed in some way by the entertainment industry, and if they weren't, then they were just angling for their break. "I see that we haven't made a good first impression," she said, "but I guess that's not much of a surprise. How long were you stuck there for?" She looked at him. Bo saw something he hadn't seen in anyone's eyes since he'd sat in the wheelchair. Understanding. "Half an hour," he said. "Shit, I have to call someone." She placed a bandage on his hand, gently pressing down to make sure it stuck. He felt his skin tingle. "Thanks." He was feeling nonplussed at the sensations her touch evoked. He got out his cell phone. "Hey, Carter, no need to come down," he said quickly. "I'm okay." He cut off Carter's questions. "I'll explain later," and hung up. "I guess I should introduce myself." She offered her hand. "I'm Maree Raynard." "Bo Tennant." As they shook, her hand was enveloped by his much larger one, and he realized how small she was. Her presence and manner made her seem much taller. If they'd met while he was standing up, she'd only reach his shoulder. "Lieutenant? Corporal?" she asked. He was surprised. He was in civilian duds, wearing jeans and a blue short-sleeved shirt. "Lieutenant, how did you know?" She reached across the table and lifted his dog tags. He smelled the sweet scent of her hand cream. As she brushed her thumb across the metal, he felt a stirring, as if she was brushing his skin. He debated about wearing them this morning. A civilian had no reason to wear dog tags, but Bo felt naked without them. "New to this?" She nodded at the wheelchair as she released the tags, her fingers like the whisper of a butterfly's wings. "A week stateside." Bo had joined up with 6 of his friends after September 11th and had been in the Army ever since. The waiter returned and placed their coffee orders on the table. "You're the first person I've met, outside of the hospital, who is nonplussed by my wheelchair." He took a sip of coffee. "A friend in high school?" Maree lifted the sugar dispenser and poured in 2 teaspoons. "She had a car accident after a party. The first 6 months, she got stuck a few times. It's amazing how many people don't know what to do. The whole wheelchair thing spooks them." "But not you." "Not much spooks me." There was a glimmer of flirtatiousness as Maree looked at him. For a moment, he forgot himself and responded as the old him, his lips quirking into a smile, his shoulders straightening as he got ready to launch into his move. Then he saw his reflection in the window behind her. His blonde hair hung to his shoulders, a beard covered most of his face, and even his eyes were unrecognizable with their brown tint. He looked down at the table as he took a sip of his coffee. He was imagining it. Why would a woman like her be interested in someone like him? "What are you doing in town?" she asked. He rubbed his hand across the back of his neck. He'd practiced his story 1,000 times. Yet now that it was showtime, he felt ill at ease. "I'm meeting with some people. They might be making a movie about me." "Oh," she said. He cleared his throat. "Yeah." "Did you write the screenplay?" she asked. "No, a friend of mine wrote it." He took a sip of his coffee. "You're a braver person than I am." "Why?" he asked. "Are you sure you know what you're getting yourself in for? After all, Hollywood is not known for its accurate storytelling." Beau was surprised by her serious face. Usually women were impressed by his movie credentials, but Maree seemed to be concerned that he was naive and getting involved in the business. "Well, it's based on me, but they're not using my name." Beau covered himself, not wanting her to think he was a fame chaser, but a regular Joe Blow who just happened to find himself in extraordinary circumstances. "That won't make much difference," she said wryly. "Once that movie comes out, you can kiss a regular life goodbye." "You seem to know a lot about the negative effects of fame," he asked. "My father is an actor." She said the word like it was a curse. "You don't sound like you like actors," Beau asked, guessing from her formal use of father instead of dad that her relationship was strained. "Maybe I don't," Maree laughed wryly. "I've seen too well what fame can do to people. They become arrogant, self-centered, and lose all touch with reality." She was looking down at the table, her eyelashes shading her eyes, but her pain was obvious from the sad slant of her lips. "Not all actors are like that," Beau said. "I've met some and they seem perfectly nice." Even though he'd been thinking cynically about the movie business, now he was feeling strangely defensive. "Some?" Maree didn't sound convinced. "Your 20 minutes are almost up," he said abruptly. She gave him a blank look. "You told whoever you were speaking to on the phone that you'd be there in 20 minutes. He explained. "Yes." She looked at her watch. "You're right. I should get going." "I've got it," he said as she reached for her purse. "No, really." He held her hand down when he saw that she was about to argue. He took out his wallet and placed a note on the table. "It was nice meeting you, Beau." Maree stood. He looked up, noticing the way she'd said his name with an inflection. "Nice to meet you too, Maree." He hesitated. Normally at this point he'd ask for her number, an act that used to be as natural as breathing. But in this new role, it didn't seem right. She lingered, and he saw in her eyes that she was waiting, giving him the chance to ask. "Would you maybe—" He started, his mouth forming the words of their own volition, but he couldn't finish the sentence. "Never mind. Thanks for everything." He wrenched his wheels in the opposite direction. "Yes," she said. He stopped and turned his head. "Call me." She handed him a card and leaned down, giving him a soft kiss on his cheekbone above the beard. After she had been swallowed up by the crowd, Beau looked down at the business card she'd passed to him. It was plain white and listed her title as costume designer for The Time of Our Lives, a popular soap opera that had been on television for 30-odd years and whose specialty was love triangles between various family members and their lovers. Beau didn't know if he would call. Pursuing someone who was so close to the business and who could easily break his cover wasn't prudent, but he was intrigued. He was still thinking about her when he entered his apartment. He'd never met a woman like Maree. It was refreshing to spend time with someone so warm and natural without an iota of artifice. He got out of the wheelchair, leaving it by the front door. As he walked into the bedroom, He looked into the vanity mirror as he took off the wig and hung it up on the styrofoam dummy head. He carefully poked his eye with his index finger and removed the disposable brown-tinted contact lenses and put them in the trash. When he looked back in the mirror, it was now the face of Tom Calvert staring at him. Tom, with his short, slicked brown hair, the blue eyes that a reporter had once described as icy, and the fine features that had helped him launch a career as a fashion model until he became a model/actor, and then finally an actor only. Sometimes he looked in the mirror and cursed himself. While his good looks had opened up doors, they'd also closed as many, guaranteeing that he would always be seen as a soap actor first and a serious actor second. He jumped in the shower, momentarily startled as he started to soap himself, and saw the black tattoo snaking across his arms and chest. It was in semi-permanent ink and proclaimed in cursive script, "For those I love, I will sacrifice." As Tom stepped out of the shower, his phone rang. "So, how did it go?" demanded the voice of his agent, Carter. "Really well," Tom said. "Just have to learn to avoid sketchy sidewalks in the future." "Ha ha," Carter said. Tom heard the sound of rustling paper and knew that Carter was doing his usual and multitasking as he spoke to him. "We've got a date for the Marco shoot in a couple of weeks," Carter reminded him of the sportswear line he'd agreed to endorse. "Great." Tom faked enthusiasm. He hadn't wanted to do it. He knew that an endorsement was just another cross against him being taken seriously, but it was the only way to scratch the right back in order to get an audition. The Heroes of Tennessee director was married to the CEO of Marco, and Carter had negotiated the deal. Thankfully, it had worked, and Tom had blown the director away and scored his dream part. "Only a month until shooting starts. Do you think you'll be ready?" Carter asked. "Shouldn't be a problem," Tom said. The movie was about 6 friends from a small town in Tennessee who signed up to the Army on the same day, and Bo's character was based on the only soldier who'd survived. Tom had been in character for a week. He'd spent hours every day as Bo, practicing maneuvering his wheelchair in and out of buildings, onto buses, and out on the street, seeing how people related to him. With each day that passed, he'd felt Bo settling onto him like an old coat. "Good," Carter said, "because you know what's at stake." "I know." This part was going to make his career. He would finally be the serious actor that he'd always wanted to be. After he hung up, he caught sight of Maree's business card and smiled. Here was his chance to really put himself to the test as Bo.
Chapter 2. Maree was pinning a police costume onto a male extra when her cell phone rang. They were shooting a riot scene next week, and there were 20 extras whose costumes had to be fitted. She answered absent-mindedly, pressing her Bluetooth earpiece. "Maree's phone," she said, her words mumbled from the pin she was holding between her lips. "Hi, Maree. It's Bo." She smiled when she heard his deep Southern accent and slipped the pin out of her mouth. "We met a few days ago when you helped me out," he interjected into the silence. "I remember." It was exactly 3 days ago, and she'd almost given up on him calling. Maree had been walking to her car after a morning meeting with the supplier when she'd seen Bo in the middle of the sidewalk, the crowd parting around him like the Red Sea. She'd sensed immediately from the stillness of his posture that something was wrong. When their eyes met, he'd flinched and looked away. She'd quickly searched for the source of his distress, and that's when she noticed the wheelchair was slightly crooked, and he was stuck. "How's the cut?" she asked now. He'd been so nervous when she cleaned his wound. Her heart had filled with tenderness at his vulnerability. Good, good, he said. How have you been? Run ragged. Maree told him about the upcoming shoot. By this time next week, I'm going to run screaming if I see a police officer, which could be dangerous, she mused. After all, they do have guns. She felt a thrill as she heard Beau's rich laugh echo in her ear. Have you seen any more of Los Angeles? Not much. I've been sticking close to the hotel I'm staying at, he said. I was hoping you would have dinner with me and help me stretch my horizons. Love to. Maree smoothed the material around the extra's leg. Oh, good. You sound surprised that I said yes. She started pinning up the seam. No, I'm not surprised, he said, sounding anything but. Really? Maree countered. Because you sound shit-faced scared. Beau laughed, the reverberation in her ear filling her with pleasure. Shit-faced scared, he repeated. You really do have a way with words. It's part of my charm, Maree said through a smile. Okay, I've been warned. Beau laughed again. When and where? How is tonight, 7 p.m.? The concierge at my hotel recommended a restaurant called Bicasa. He hesitated. I'll meet you there. Maree cut into the silence. She'd had time to think about the logistics of dating a man in a wheelchair. Great, he said, relief in his voice. I'll see you tonight. Until tonight. After she hung up, Maree stood and signaled to her assistant, Allegra, to come help her remove the pinned-up uniform off the extra. Who put a smile on your dial? Allegra asked as she inserted a coat hanger in the police uniform and hung it on the metal clothes rack. That was Beau, Maree said. So he did call. Allegra wheeled the clothes rack into the corner, making sure to avoid a dressmaker dummy encased in a taffeta Civil War-era gown. I guess better late than never. He's shy, Maree said. Uh-huh. Allegra walked over to her desk and sat on the edge, just the way you like them. Do I hear judgment? Maree asked, detecting an undertone in Allegra's voice. I'm just wondering what's his thing. Allegra carefully arranged her long skirt around her legs as if she was posing for a photo shoot. Allegra was a lover of vintage fashion and treated every day like it was a dress-up day. Today she was wearing a black and white, pinstriped 1950s dress and stockings with a seam running down the back of her legs. Since you only take on self-help projects. I do not, Maree said. Really? Allegra frowned at her. What about the single daddy and his 5 little kidlets? That wasn't a pity thing. Andrew was sweet and kind. Maree remembered her last boyfriend. They'd met at the supermarket when his youngest daughter, a 2-year-old toddler, attached herself to Maree's legs. Andrew had come running a few minutes later, apologizing profusely, while calling out to his 10-year-old son to stop using the trolley as a skateboard. Maree's heart had melted as she saw Andrew's stress as he tried to track his children all over the supermarket. She'd left her trolley in the aisle and helped him with his shopping, and found out he'd become a single father after his wife passed away from cancer 6 months before. Andrew was using you as a nanny, Allegra said. He needed help, Maree countered. It was true that Andrew had needed quite a lot of help so that he could catch up on work, and in the 3 months that they were an item, Maree ended up spending a great deal of time with his kids. But she hadn't minded. She'd fallen in love with them. Anyway, I love spending time with his kids. Even after they realized that their relationship was lacking the passion that should have existed, they'd become firm friends, and Maree still regularly babysat his children. Yes, you love spending time with them more than with their daddy, which says it all. Allegra waved her hands, her neon nails shimmering. And let's not forget the one before that, Darren, the entrepreneur. David, Maree corrected. She'd met David at a launch party, one of those affairs that others might view as a golden ticket, but she only saw as a work function. A mutual friend introduced her and David, and they'd hit it off. He was charming and passionate, and soon they'd drifted into a relationship. He needed a profile, and you became his private product placement consultant, Allegra said. David had a great idea to make jewelry out of recycled products. Maree believed in his dream, and she'd recommended him to her costume designer friends, who used his jewelry when designing outfits for their characters. Within a year, he'd moved from developing prototypes to receiving orders from luxury jewelry stores. His company is doing great now, and I'm receiving income on the shares, Maree said. Yes, but you're not the one warming his bed, Allegra reminded her. Last time I saw him in the society pages, he was wrapped like an anaconda around a Victoria's Secret model. Things didn't work out, Maree said. It happens. When David's company took off, he'd become busy and a relationship was too hard to juggle. They'd soon come to the mutual decision that while the spark was there, their timing was off. We're still friends, though. They'd just been to lunch a few days before. And that's another problem, Allegra said. You can't be friends with all your exes. It's just not natural. Says the woman who ritually burns her ex's belongings, Maree said. Allegra was known as high maintenance. She was always attached. In the 2 years Maree had known her, the longest Allegra had ever gone between relationships was a month, and that was because she was bedridden with the flu. And Allegra's relationships never lasted because of her hair-trigger temper. The minute her boyfriend stepped out of line, taking too long to call back, or eyeballing a waitress who served them, there was hell to pay. Her temper tantrums rivaled tsunamis because of the destruction they left in their wake. She treated men like disposable accessories and always assumed there was something better around the corner. And she was usually right. With her almost cartoon-like hourglass figure, striking face, and lush lips, men were never in short supply. Enough digressing. You haven't answered my question. What's wrong with this guy? Allegra demanded. Nothing. Maree leaned over her desk, pretending to flick through her sketchbook, her long hair hiding her flushed cheeks. Fess up, Allegra demanded. I know there's something wrong. Your whole body language is screaming guilt. Maree hunched further, desperately turning pages of her book. Allegra tore the sketchbook out of her hands. Tell me now, or I'm going to torpedo your desk. Allegra tossed the book on the floor. All right, all right. Maree gave in, knowing that this was no idle threat. Her desk was always artfully littered with sketches and pieces of material. If Allegra followed through, she'd never be able to find anything. He's in a wheelchair, she muttered, as she bent to pick up her sketchbook off the floor. What was that? Allegra leaned closer. He's in a wheelchair. Maree sat on her stool. She waited for Allegra to launch into a tirade, but instead, silence greeted her. She looked up and found Allegra staring at her with pity. What? I blame that father of yours for making you think you're not worthy of anything better. Allegra shook her head sadly. Maree felt anger take hold. "I'm getting coffee." She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. She never could deal with confrontations. Her throat got choked up, and she couldn't force any words out. Escape was her only option. As she stalked out of the building and onto the studio lot, she felt shaken up by Allegra's reaction. By the time she'd completed the 10-minute walk to the coffee bar on the lot, her anger had eased, and she was melancholy. She hated being the object of pity. As she waited for her coffee among the tourists completing the studio tour, she wondered how much truth there was in Allegra's statement. So she liked men who were vulnerable and gentle. What was wrong with that? She noticed a guy checking her out in line. He was breathtakingly handsome, impeccably dressed, and his hair was perfectly styled. A dead giveaway that he was an actor. There was something familiar about him. She'd probably seen him on a poster somewhere. Maree sensed he was building up to speak to her, and she quickly moved away, turning her back to him. She hated guys like that, who looked like they had just stepped out of a Vogue magazine. She was drawn to men who were real and unaffected by vanity. Her order was called, and Maree stepped up to the counter. She could see Mr. Vogue eyeing her, probably viewing her disinterest as a challenge. She was relieved to get out of the cafe. She heard someone calling to her. She turned over her shoulder and saw Mr. Vogue pursuing her. She gave a sigh of frustration. She should have known he'd be the persistent type. He caught up to her and said hello. Maree tried to shake him off, but he asked her out anyway, only to receive the stock standard answer she gave to all actors, a firm and resounding no. She only dated men who weren't associated with the entertainment industry. Maree took the scenic route back to her office, passing by the wrought iron entrance gates. She sipped her coffee as she walked through the studio lot and remembered the movies she'd watched being filmed behind each door as a child. Her parents met on the set of The Valiant and the Vain, on which they were both stars. After a whirlwind wedding, they had an even quicker divorce when Maree was only 1 year old, and her mother realized that her father's on-screen persona as a womanizer was a case of art imitating life. When she was 8 years old, her mother passed away, and she went to live with her father, which meant the studio became her second home. She'd spent her childhood and adolescence traversing every building on the 40-acre lot and became well known to the grounds and security staff, which ensured she was able to finagle her way into many movie sound stages. She was 11 years old when she snuck onto the first Mission Impossible set and watched Tom Cruise perform that iconic and much imitated stunt of hanging from a harness above a white floor. When she saw the movie at the cinema, she had her first taste of understanding the make-believe world of movie making. With its mix of tin sheds and large buildings, the studio lot might look intimidating to most people, but to Maree, it was almost as familiar as the palm of her hand. As she walked along slowly, her thoughts returned to Beau, and she wondered if Allegra was right. Was she only going out with him because of pity? She remembered the way that his feelings seemed to be written on his face. No, Allegra was wrong. Maree was definitely attracted to him, and she knew he was attracted to her. She just wanted the opportunity to see whether he lived up to her expectations. Maree had never cared about a man's assets or looks. Her only requirement of a potential partner was a good heart. Growing up in the business, she'd been around beautiful people all her life and knew that their good looks were just a quirk of genetics. Others might idolize movie stars and anoint them as chosen ones, but Maree knew that beauty was most times skin deep, and led those endowed with it to believe they were owed something from the world. Seeing her father in action her whole life, she had decided early on that she would never date an actor, that she wanted a man who was genuine. When she returned to her office, she placed Allegra's skim macchiato on her desk. "Seriously, Maree, I'm the one who should be giving a peace offering," Allegra said as she lifted the cup to take a sip. "I know you're just looking out for me." Maree hung up her bag. "Yes, I am," Allegra said, "but it doesn't mean I have to be a bitch about it. I've been thinking about your date." Maree knew from Allegra's wicked smile that it was going to be something she wouldn't like hearing. "There are perks to dating a man in a wheelchair," Allegra said coyly. "A little cunnilingus goes a long way." "Oh, God!" Maree burst into laughter. Her stomach hurt by the time she finished. "Just remember that I want to hear all the dirty details." Allegra twirled in her chair. "There will be no dirty details," Maree said. Allegra lifted her eyebrow, indicating her disbelief. Maree shook her head and tried to get back to work, but she kept remembering the shape of Beau's mouth. She flushed as she wondered what his beard would feel like against her skin.